Dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. Now, a strange mystery has been discovered in a remote corner of the world.
Something's going on here, and we really don't understand it.
68 huge Tyrannosaur skeletons discovered in one location. What happened?
There's lots of skeletons here of animals that may have all died together, and it's always puzzled people.
One scientist has a controversial theory.
They hunted in deadly, bloodthirsty packs.
But his theory meets tough resistance.
I doubt the idea would even cross their tiny reptile brains.
Mammals were thought to have been the first organized hunters millions of years after the dinosaurs. A pack of hunting tyrannosaurs would have been deadly and terrifying.
It's the stuff of nightmares. You wouldn't have a chance.
It's a bold theory. But can Dr. Phil Currie prove it? His quest for evidence takes him into the company of the world's most dangerous predators and into the darkest corners of T-Rex's head. It raises some challenging questions.
In the past, we were just trying to figure out what tyrannosaurs were. Now we're actually trying to find out who they were.
If dinosaurs hadn't become extinct, would gangs of killer tyrannosaurs now rule the world? Would mankind have survived in such a deadly place? "65 million years ago, a huge carnivore roamed the earth. Tyrannosaurus rex, the tyrant lizard king. It was over 40 feet long, 13 feet high, and weighed around 7 tons. Its huge jaws contain more than 60 9-inch-long, bone-crunching teeth. But was T-Rex a solitary, mindless killer, or was it an intelligent, social creature? The first T-Rex skeleton was discovered over 100 years ago.
When we first found tyrannosaurs like T-Rex, we were immediately struck by what gigantic, predatory, terrifying animals they were.
Further finds reinforce this image of a formidable killer, terrorizing prehistoric Earth. It captured the public's imagination. How intelligent were these creatures? Would they still rule the world if they hadn't become extinct? Would mankind have survived in a world dominated by T-Rex?
Dinosaurs have been viewed as relatively dull-witted, but the emerging picture now is that some predatory dinosaurs were actually quite intelligent.
And yet so little is known about them. For years, scientists concluded that tyrannosaurs were solitary creatures, since their skeletons were found alone. But then, deep in the Gobi Desert, one of the most hostile places on Earth, an extraordinary discovery was made. 68 tyrannosaur skeletons, some lying very close together. It was a baffling mystery. Over 5,000 miles away in Western Canada, a scientist believes he has the explanation. Dr. Phil Currie is a paleontologist and highly respected dinosaur expert. He's been obsessed with tyrannosaurs since a young age.
When I was 6 years old, I opened up a cereal box one day and there was a plastic dinosaur inside. I really loved that little thing. It inspired my imagination. My parents had to buy me that cereal over and over and over again because I was looking for the Tyrannosaurus rex.
His early fascination with this deadly predator led Dr. Currie to become one of the world's preeminent experts on tyrannosaurs.
This is Tyrannosaurus rex, without a doubt the most fearsome predator that ever walked the earth. It had a skull that was 5 feet long, a head that's so big that it probably weighed half a ton. These teeth are serrated down the front and the back, so they are like steak knives in a way. However, the teeth have to be incredibly thick. They're like big bananas. And the reason for that is pure and simple. They're not only biting through flesh, they're also biting right through bone. Tyrannosaurs were the top predators of the very end of the age of dinosaurs. Those were the most highly adapted large predators that existed during the entire age. And I think they were by far the most dangerous animals.
But being a big, brutal heavyweight had its drawbacks.
When we first found these animals, we sort of assumed they were relatively slow-moving, dull-witted animals. They were probably solitary hunters.
Tyrannosaurs, I believe, were far more complex and more dangerous than we ever could have imagined.
Dr. Currie has a radical theory that changes perceived thought about tyrannosaurs. It also explains the mystery in the Gobi Desert.
These animals were, in fact, in the same place because they died together, and they died together because they were, in fact, living together. They hunted in gangs.
Dr. Currie's idea that tyrannosaurs hunted in deadly, organized gangs means they were more intelligent and therefore far more dangerous than imagined. It's a terrifying thought. Nothing could outrun or outmaneuver such a lethal pack of bloodthirsty killers. But it's a highly controversial theory. It even raises questions about our own evolution. And many scientists strongly disagree with Currie's new theory.
What is the evidence that they are pack-hunting animals? In paleontology and in any science, we have to constrain our speculations, hopefully with some data.
Pack hunting probably evolved with the rise of mammals. The reptilian brain is not as sophisticated as a mammalian brain, and I don't think they'd be capable of such behaviors, cooperation. They had just enough brains to survive, find their meal, find their mate.
Currie's theory flies in the face of the established view. If his idea is to be taken seriously, he has to find solid proof. The most convincing evidence would be a group of tyrannosaurs buried together, but that's extremely difficult to find. His search leads to an important clue. Dr. Currie was in New York one day, studying the bones of a relative of T-Rex's, called Albertosaurus.
I'll open up a drawer, and there's a foot of an Albertosaurus. Now, it's not just one bone, it's a whole foot. And it's a left foot. Pretty interesting. I open the next drawer, and there's 2 more left feet.
He found 9 separate left feet. That meant 9 skeletons, all of them tyrannosaurs. The color of the bones suggested they originated from the Red Deer River Canyon in Alberta, Canada. But given the length of the river and the steep and treacherous surrounding terrain, looking for evidence would be like searching for the proverbial needle in a haystack. Dr. Currie has one vital aid to help him pinpoint the exact place. A photograph taken in 1910. It shows the site where the Albertosaurus bones were found. There's a distinctive ridge behind it. Dr. Currie scours the Badlands, searching for the Tyrannosaur graveyard. It seems like an impossible task. Finally, he finds what he's been searching for.
It happened to be the hottest day of the year. It was 43 that day, and I kept at it because I was pretty determined.
Climbing over a hill, Dr. Currie stops dead in his tracks. Up ahead is the ridge from the photograph.
As soon as I saw that, then I knew I had the quarry. I was at the point of heat exhaustion at that stage. So I didn't look around my feet. Otherwise, I would have seen there were Albertosaurus bones all over the place.
The next day, Dr. Currie and his team start digging. There are dinosaur bones everywhere.
It's pretty cool because the smallest animal we have now in the Albertosaurus bone bed is less than 2 meters long, probably about 2 years old. We have a lot of juveniles, a lot of teenagers, and then we have the full adult animals that were, say, between 20 and 24 years old.
Eventually, 23 huge skeletons are excavated. All of them tyrannosaurs.
This was the solid proof that we needed to show that they didn't just eat together, that they were in fact living together and interacting with each other.
But the scientific community remains skeptical. They assert that any natural disaster can push unrelated animals together and make them appear like a family group.
It's far more reasonable to interpret the Albertosaurus bone bed as the result of some kind of environmental pressures that are drawing these animals together.
There could have been a drought and they were gathering around a water hole. And if that was followed by a rapid flash flood of a river or riverbed, then that can result in lots of individuals all dying together, even though they didn't live together.
Something like a flash flood would actually clump that number of skeletons together in such a short time.
I don't doubt that Tyrannosaurs died together at the Albertosaurus bone bed. One argument is that they may have come together as separate carcasses drifting in and got jammed up, or they may have died during a feeding frenzy. Well, I think Phil has a long way to go to gather enough irrefutable evidence for his idea about pack hunting.
When you get attacked about your theories, of course, the natural tendency is either to feel knocked down and despondent, I suppose, about the fact that everybody doesn't agree with your ideas. I shouldn't really let it upset me, because really what I have to do is always go out and collect more evidence to support my claims.
How far will Dr. Currie have to travel to find the evidence to support his theory that tyrannosaurs were really more intelligent and more dangerous than anyone thought? Paleontologist Dr. Phil Currie believes that tyrannosaurs were the deadliest predators of their time. They hunted in organized gangs from which no prey could escape. But he needs solid proof to convince the scientific community of his theory.
The idea that tyrannosaurs hunted in packs is kind of crazy for a lot of people. It's very controversial. We'd always thought that tyrannosaurs hunted as solitary animals.
Since the tyrannosaur graveyard discovered in Canada isn't enough to prove his theory, Currie now travels to Mongolia's remote and inhospitable Gobi Desert. He wants to investigate the mystery of 68 tyrannosaur skeletons discovered in close proximity. If these carnivores died together, Currie hopes he can find evidence to prove they also lived and hunted as a group.
Paleontologists are kind of like detectives in a way. You go back to the scene of a crime and you look at all the evidence and you try and interpret what's going on.
It's a grueling 6-day drive to the place where the fossils were found. Most of the Gobi Desert lies at an altitude of 3,000 to 4,000 feet. It occupies an area nearly as big as Alaska and is completely isolated from the outside world. Temperatures are extreme, soaring to the high 40s in the summer and down to minus 40 in the winter. It's such a hostile environment that not even the local tribespeople can survive here. Working in the Gobi is not for the faint-hearted. Base camp is at a place called Bugin Sav, nearly 600 miles from the Mongolian capital. All food and water has to be brought in and used sparingly. This is extreme paleontology.
When it comes to hunting dinosaurs in Mongolia, particular places like Bugin Sav, I mean, this is an absolute gold mine.
For Dr. Currie and his international team, this is the ultimate destination.
I try to go where there's a chance of making good discoveries, finding new things about past life on the Earth.
The environment around us is a challenge. We have to get past that. And in some strange way, it kind of focuses your attention and makes you even all the more determined, regardless of the sandstorms and the flies and all the gear failure. In spite of all that, we're determined to get the answers that we came to get.
It's one of the richest prehistoric graveyards on Earth.
It's just a bunch of rock to most people, but to us, it has so much information, not only on the environment that dinosaur lived in, but also on the behavior of that dinosaur.
But time is limited. The excavation season is just 6 weeks. This is all the time Dr. Currie and his team have to find proof that the 68 skeletons found here were part of a social group. In the morning, the team set out to explore the area. They need to locate where the skeletons were discovered. Skeletons belonging to another T-Rex relative, Tarbosaurus, are uncovered.
So this was a really nasty animal. It had absolutely enormous, very, very powerful jaws.
Currie has the GPS coordinates for each of the excavation sites.
I'm just checking my GPS here to see which one this is. There are so many of them here that I can't keep them straight.
As he searches, he sees dinosaur fossils everywhere. Finally, he's able to pinpoint the various sites where the 68 skeletons were found. And many are very close together.
Tarbosaurus 7 is over there. Tarbosaurus 10 is over there. Tarbosaurus 64 is over there. 62 and 63 are over there. And Tarbosaurus 4 are over there. I can see those right from here.
With up to 11 skeletons lying so close together, this could be the proof of a Tyrannosaurus social group that Dr. Currie has been looking for. But there is one major problem. Just because skeletons lie close to each other now does not mean they were together 70 million years ago. To determine whether these tyrannosaurs died at the same time and in the same place, the surrounding terrain has to be analyzed. This is the expertise of geologist Dr. Dave Eberth.
Geologists often work with paleontologists to provide the environmental context. We look at the rocks, we see how everything's put together, and we can determine how the dinosaurs got buried, and in some cases even determine how they died.
Reading clues in the barren landscape, Dr. Eberth can determine that most of the tyrannosaurs found here did not die at the same time.
We're sitting in the middle of the Gobi Desert, obviously, and it's a very dry and hot environment. But 70 million years ago, this was a pretty lush area. There were meandering rivers that were sluggishly flowing through this area. And there were a variety of animals living along the banks of those rivers.
There were ample hunting opportunities for predators. Here, tyrannosaurs perished and were buried. Over thousands of years, the course of the river meandered sideways across the plain as it flowed towards the sea. 500,000 years later, the riverbed shifted. Another tyrannosaur died and was buried at the new site. Both skeletons are found on the same desert plain, but they died thousands of years apart.
We're being fooled in a sense because it's a flat area, and we're seeing the subtlety of the stratigraphy concentrating a lot of animals in an apparent surface. We're probably seeing animals living through 500,000 years of time.
With up to 500,000 years between the deaths of some of the Gobi tyrannosaurs, the evidence so far does not support Dr. Currie's theory. But he's not defeated. After weeks in the desert, a number of new fossils have been collected and detailed information recorded for each of them. Studying the fossil sites, Dr. Currie is able to refine his vision of what happened here 65 million years ago.
We can find Tarbosaurus at this time up here. We can find Tarbosaurus in the older rocks down below. But that there are concentrations in certain places at certain times.
Studying these concentrations, Currie finally has a breakthrough. He finds two skeletons lying side by side in the same rock layer, which means they died at the same time.
The two specimens that are over there, that are side by side, are definitely at the same level. One is an adult, the other one is a half-grown juvenile, and could well be mother and baby for all we know.
Dr. Currie is convinced that if these two tyrannosaurs were living together, then almost certainly others were too.
I don't think there's any question that at Bugin Sav we're looking at maybe a dozen Tarbosaurus that were buried within days or possibly even hours of each other. This was the evidence I needed to take an idea much further ahead than anybody had been possible to do before.
But the scientific community needs more evidence.
Phil has actually found evidence that these animals lived together, but not necessarily that they were pack hunters. The proof that would really clinch it for me is this evidence of finding multiple individuals at a single kill site.
No one has ever found the skeleton of a prey animal with evidence of many tyrannosaurs feeding on it. Is that because it never happened? This raises a fundamental question. If Tyrannosaurus was such a successful killer, why would it need to hunt in a pack? Dr. Currie's quest for answers will lead him into the darkest corners of this mighty killer's brain. After analyzing Tyrannosaur fossil sites in the Gobi Desert, paleontologist Dr. Phil Currie believes he has enough evidence to show that these deadly beasts did live in groups. But a worrying question remains. If tyrannosaurs were such successful killers, why would they need to hunt in a gang?
In the past, we were just trying to figure out what tyrannosaurs were. Now we're actually trying to find out who they were. We're trying to understand what their behavior was like.
Dr. Currie and the team make an amazing discovery. They find the fossilized bones of a huge dinosaur. Could it be a tyrannosaur? Will it tell them something new about these prehistoric predators? They dig down with extreme care.
The rule of thumb is that the further you are away from the specimen, the bigger the tools you use, but once you get closer, you use finer and finer tools. Basically, this level is dental picks.
As millions of years of sediment are carefully chipped away, what's revealed is not another Tyrannosaur, but an ancient plant-eater. One of the many species that carnivores preyed on before the Gobi became a desert. Tyrannosaurus would have been like a modern-day lion in this world, the king of the jungle, vastly outnumbered by its prey. But just because tyrannosaurs were big and powerful with a deadly bite, doesn't mean that catching prey alone was easy.
Being a predator is actually a pretty risky business because the prey animals don't want to be eaten, and very often they will fight back and have the tools to fight back.
Like many prey animals today, Tyrannosaur's targets had a range of defense mechanisms. Sauropods, like the massive Nemegtosaurus, can be up to 100 feet long, just too big for a lone Tyrannosaur. Ankylosaurus wore a suit of heavy armor and could break bones with the heavy club at the end of its tail. Protoceratops had a large bone shield projecting from its skull, protecting its neck, making a single killer bite extremely difficult.
Predators actually risk their lives every time they go after a prey animal. It may kick the predator, use horns, use claws, use any means to not be eaten.
Meanwhile, in the Gobi Desert, the team identify the herbivore fossil they've discovered. It's a Therizinosaurus, a 40-foot-long dinosaur that weighs about 4 tons, with sharp, scythe-like claws to defend itself.
One of the things we're still looking for in this quarry now is the claws of the animal. We have the lower arms, we have the upper arm, we have the vertebral column, but we still haven't found the claws. Some of these animals had claws up to 1 meter long, which is really hard to believe, but they had them. We think that maybe they were using their hands more for ripping apart logs or nests of termites or who knows exactly what, but the claws were there for function, not just defense or catching prey. You know, when you think about it, it does make an awful lot of sense that these packs of tyrannosaurs would have a lot of advantages by hunting together.
Overcoming a prey's defensive weaponry is just one of the reasons tyrannosaurs could have benefited from hunting in a gang. Another reason is that, like many of today's prey animals, plant-eating dinosaurs moved around in big herds.
These herds included tens, hundreds, or even thousands of animals in the herds. These were like bison herds, gigantic herds of animals moving north for the summer and then south again for the winter.
Many predators today are solitary hunters, but those that feed on large herds have tended to evolve pack hunting strategies.
It's the same kind of pattern we see today in many parts of the world, where herbivores move in big groups, carnivores do it as well.
Look at the king of beasts, lions. They live in prides, and they cooperate in their hunting. If you look at wolves, they cooperate in their hunting.
It's likely that if tyrannosaurs were hunting prey that moved around in herds, that they were doing it in packs.
Like lions, tyrannosaurs were the apex predators of their world. This means they probably made up between 5 and 10% of the total animal population in their area. For the 11 tyrannosaurs that appear to have died at the same time in this part of the Gobi, Dr. Currie anticipates finding between 100 and 200 herbivores.
We would expect to find skeletons of armored dinosaurs and hadrosaurs and sauropods for every tarbosaurus that we find. But at this level, that's not what we're finding.
The number of tyrannosaur fossils found is disproportionately high.
We're finding Tarbosaurus makes up 30, 40, or even 50% of the animals at this particular level. Something's going on here, and We really don't understand it.
What makes it even more puzzling is that the geological layers show a normal ratio of fossilized footprints between predators and their prey.
When we look at the footprint sites, we find that Tarbosaurus tracks are actually very rare and make up less than 10% of the tracks that we find.
This is what Dr. Currie would expect to find. So where have all the plant-eater skeletons gone? Currie will have to travel halfway around the world to find the answer to this question. The Tyrannosaur skeletons found together are his strongest evidence yet that these predators might have lived together. Perhaps even in something resembling a pride of lions.
Lions have a very complicated social structure. We have no evidence for that sort of social structure directly from the fossil record for something like Tyrannosaurus. The combination limited intelligence and I think extremely large body size meant that it had to pretty much be every Tyrannosaur for himself.
I think people find pack hunting controversial because they're really big animals that require a lot of food, and in order for them to cooperate in that way, they'd have to get even more food because they'd be feeding large numbers of individuals.
As a social group, they may have hunted far more successfully than they could have done as solitary animals. They would have been able to break up herds of dinosaurs to take them.
Hunting in a team also requires speed and maneuverability, as well as intelligence.
And the things that allow top predators to catch their prey are their speed, agility, their sense of sight and smell, and their claws and their teeth, and the adaptations of their skeleton to the force and the battle and the struggles that automatically ensue when trying to make a meal out of a living animal.
Dr. Currie needs physical evidence that tyrannosaurs had the speed and agility to hunt down fleeing prey.
We hope that you're always going to have that magic moment that here at last in this bone that I've uncovered now, I've got the absolute proof to show that these animals were doing exactly this. What I look forward to is other people looking at those specimens and coming to their own conclusions.
This is the hind leg of one of the large Tarbosaur specimens.
The fossil has been here for 70 million years. The bone itself is now white rock, while the marrow with its red blood cells has turned into darker stone. The leg bone illustrates a key characteristic of Tyrannosaur's development.
The animal changes as it grows up. And pretty big changes, really. I mean, it doesn't look like the same animal as a baby as it does as an adult.
Some of the most dramatic and visible evidence of change during growth in a Tyrannosaur is visible in the legs.
Analyzing these dramatic changes could help Dr. Currie understand how these prehistoric predators hunted. To do that, he must try to extract this ancient fossil out of the ground in one piece.
Today's goal is to get this leg out of here. So we're going to trench around it a little bit deeper, and we're going to cap it with plaster and burlap, flip it over, and cap the other side.
The fossil has to be pried loose with extreme care. Any jolt might cause the surrounding rock to crack and destroy the valuable evidence. The team now have the delicate task of turning the fossil over to protect the other side. It's nerve-wracking work.
When we flip any jacket, it's a very apprehensive time because you don't know if you've done it deep enough and you don't know if it's going to fall out the bottom. Cause for some stress, I would say.
Tensions run high. If they haven't dug deep enough, they run the risk of breaking the priceless fossil when it's turned over.
Beauty. Woo-wee. Beauty.
That was a tough one.
We turned it successfully. There were just a few little things that would have been better if we'd been a little bit deeper, but then we might have had other problems. So this is perfect.
Safely wrapped in a solid plaster jacket, the fossil is taken back to camp.
For me, that was fantastic. It was a very nice jacket removal as well as a jacketing process for that particular specimen. Textbook.
After 6 intense weeks in the desert, the dig season is over, and the team must leave the Gobi. It's been a very successful trip.
Being a paleontologist is like somebody who puts together jigsaw puzzles, and whether we're looking at individual skeletons trying to put them together, or whether you're looking at a body of evidence that's growing as you collect parts of more specimens and more data concerning the environment the dinosaur was living in and so on, you're putting together a jigsaw in a very different way, but it's still a jigsaw puzzle. And as we get more evidence or more pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, of course, you get closer to some kind of completion.
First stop for the precious fossils is the Mongolian capital, Ulaanbaatar. The bones will be shipped to a special research laboratory in South Korea. There, the investigative work will get underway.
We can pull these fossils out of the ground, but we're not always sure immediately what they actually mean. Once we get them back to the lab, then the science starts. And at that point, the explosion of information begins, and we start to figure out what those fossil bones are really trying to tell us.
It might reveal that Tyrannosaurs did have the speed and agility to hunt in packs. If so, scientists will have to revise their idea of this creature having been a slow, dull-witted animal. And maybe think again about our own evolution.
We think we're the best and the most highly evolved and the most highly adapted animals that ever existed. But when you have animals that dominated the world for 150 million years, you know they did something right.
Dr. Currie has to ensure the fossils reach the laboratory undamaged. One slip and the vital evidence could be shattered. What might these ancient bones reveal under the bright laboratory lights? Will they help prove Dr. Currie's controversial theory that Tyrannosaurs were the deadliest pack hunters ever known? Seoul, the capital of South Korea, home to 10 million people and to the latest technology for analyzing fossils. Dr. Phil Currie is taking his fossil to a specialized laboratory on the outskirts of the city.
It's kind of like Christmas, and you finally see the specimens in the lab, and for the first time you can actually take them out one at a time, lay them out on a table, and see what you manage to accomplish.
First, the Gobi fossils are catalogued and stored. Then the real work begins.
Very often people think that the excavation is the end of the deal, but it's not. It's just the beginning.
Preparing the fossilized bones for analysis is a painstaking process. First, the protective plaster jacket has to be cut away. Once the plaster has been removed, the remaining rock is chipped away from the bone.
This is a very exciting part of the process. It's starting to put all those pieces together in the jigsaw puzzle.
Only when the surrounding rock is removed is the actual fossil revealed. To the trained eye, it's a window onto a world that ended 65 million years ago.
When you look at these bones, sometimes you forget that these represent an animal that was at the height of its evolution. This Tyrannosaur is probably the most efficient killing machine that existed during the late Cretaceous times.
But how did such a heavy animal manage to chase and hunt prey so successfully? The museum display illustrates how dramatically tyrannosaurs changed proportions as they grew from juveniles into adults.
The adults were massive-bodied, clearly slower moving, whereas the juveniles were lightly built, fast-running animals.
This is the vital key to Dr. Currie's theory of a fast-moving gang of deadly predators. Analyzing the foot bones of a juvenile tyrannosaur, Currie reveals an extraordinary fact.
When we compare the length of these three bones to the length of the upper leg bone, the thigh bone,
We see that in the juveniles,
these are more than 2/3 the length of the upper leg bones.
when your bones in the lower part of the leg and the foot are long compared to the upper part of the leg, mechanically you're better equipped for running faster.
Another change we see is that juvenile tyrannosaurs have a much more lightly built skull, and as the animal gets larger, the back of the skull becomes disproportionately broad, accommodating huge jaw-closing muscles. So the juveniles had a relatively weak, rapid bite, whereas the adults had a powerful, crushing bite.
Then, as the juveniles grew up, they underwent a remarkable transformation.
The proportions change dramatically so that the foot bones are 2/3 the length of the femur, no more than that. As the animal gets bigger, the smaller these bones are in terms of length compared to the other leg bones.
And that's more like what we see in something like an elephant that would allow the animal to move its enormous weight around, but it might have meant that the adult tyrannosaurs were much slower at running than the juveniles.
As adults, tyrannosaurs required thicker, heavier bones to support their massive bulk, big skulls, and huge killer jaws.
We know by comparison of proportions of the juveniles to the adults that the juveniles were animals that were capable of running much faster.
But how fast is that? Often the best way to understand these ancient animals is to compare them with modern ones. One animal with the same body proportions as a juvenile Tyrannosaurus is the ostrich.
When you look at modern birds, particularly big birds like ostriches, and you do a comparison with some of these large dinosaurs, it really is pretty shocking because fundamentally you are looking at almost exactly the same feet. These animals are relatively slender in the lower part of the leg compared to the upper part of the leg, of course, where all the musculature is. The proportions are quite similar with ostriches, actually, so we can make more direct comparisons.
Ostriches are the fastest two-legged runners on Earth. If juvenile tyrannosaurs had the same leg proportions as an ostrich, would that have given them the speed and agility to hunt in killer gangs?
It's pretty amazing watching ostriches run across the veldt because, they're so much like tyrannosaurs. They really boot it, they go fast. The amazing thing, I guess, is just that they're so maneuverable.
It's no coincidence that these extraordinary birds resemble tyrannosaurs. Birds descended from two-legged dinosaurs.
Their erect stance, their capacity for fast running and large body sizes, they're much more similar to what we get in birds and mammals than to what we see in reptiles.
A baby Tyrannosaurus has about the same build as an ostrich. And so if you want to understand what they were capable of, it's a good idea if you can understand what ostriches are capable of.
Ostriches can reach speeds of up to 45 miles per hour. That's twice as fast as an Olympic sprinter. Could a young Tyrannosaur have been capable of this kind of speed?
Trying to understand what they were capable of doing in terms of running and maneuvering is very difficult because they're dead animals.
And mussels aren't preserved as fossils. Studying the leg bones of a juvenile Tyrannosaur, Dr. Currie can see that their proportions are very similar to those of an ostrich.
When we look at an ostrich, of course, we're looking to the closest living analogy to a predatory dinosaur. The ostriches, of course, aren't predatory anymore, but back in the Cretaceous, all its ancestors were predatory. And so the moves and the speed that you see in that animal are probably related to actually hunting, seeking, and running down prey. Today, of course, they're prey themselves, and they have to worry about getting away from other things. But still, the advantage that they had with the speed and maneuverability works very well for them today.
We now know how fast they may have run. Dr. Currie needs to find out if their muscles were also similar.
Looking at a modern ostrich then gives us a clue as to how the musculature in a Tyrannosaur may have behaved, and also gives us a clue on how the whole leg may have in fact mechanically moved.
Exposing an ostrich's leg muscles, vet Dr. Jan Forster shows Currie the closest thing to a Tyrannosaur's leg he's likely to see.
The amazing thing to me is just that, when you look at these joints, they really aren't different at all from the dinosaurs. These animals have the bulk of the muscles concentrated up top. And once you get into the lower part of the leg, everything is run by tendons and ligaments, and they give it a certain amount of spring.
The key to the ostrich's speed lies in its elongated metatarsal foot bones, which give it a longer stride.
The limb bone proportions in a baby Tyrannosaur is so close to what we see in ostriches, we can't help but think that the lever system we're seeing is exactly what we would expect to see in a Tyrannosaur.
This means that a young Tyrannosaur would have been capable of the same speed as an ostrich. But what about the adults?
T-Rex just didn't have enough muscle to be able to run very fast for an animal of its size.
Dr. Currie wants to try to calculate the speed of a fully grown Tyrannosaurus, to know if it was capable of hunting prey.
4.
Although no two-legged animal alive today can be compared to a big Tyrannosaurus, there is a place that can work out its approximate speed. The Royal Veterinary College, Hatfield, one of the leading institutes in the world. Scientist John Hutchinson will try to measure just how fast a Tyrannosaurus could run.
All we have for dinosaurs, unfortunately, is largely the bones and occasionally some footprints. So how can we reconstruct what they might have behaved like? Well, animals are generally made of the same stuff. Muscle is muscle, bone is bone. So we can apply what we know from living animals and the laws of physics to dinosaurs and reconstruct them.
Dr. Hutchinson's high-speed cameras have filmed various running animals, from horses to cheetahs. Today, much like an ostrich or a tyrannosaur, it's a two-legged runner.
Set, go.
Force receptors in the laboratory floor measure the impact of the runner's foot. Computers record the movement of the runner's white markers and build an accurate digital model of his motion and speed.
Go.
All the information is then gathered into the computer model, where the results can be analyzed.
There are certain principles of movement that apply from ants to elephants. The force of the limb on the ground goes up very quickly and reaches a peak about at mid-step of around 2.5 times body weight.
That means a 200-pound runner's leg must support 500 pounds of force each time his foot lands. For a 6-ton adult Tyrannosaur, that's an incredible force of 15 tons smashing into each leg.
So that's a lot of force on one leg. You need really big leg muscles to prevent the limb from collapsing.
Such an immense load would force the animal's leg to change shape as it grew, becoming stronger and broader by the time it reached adulthood.
This, of course, increased disproportionately, and the bigger you get, the thicker you become, which means you become even bigger yet.
If a young Tyrannosaurus could run at 45 miles per hour, what does Dr. Hutchinson predict for a charging 6-ton adult?
A large Tyrannosaur might have been able to run somewhere between 15 to 25 miles per hour.
Between youth and adulthood, that's a decrease in top speed from 45 to 25 miles per hour.
John Hutchinson's work clearly shows that the larger the Tyrannosaur, the slower it's going to be.
Dr. Currie has clearly revealed that young Tyrannosaurs were fast and would have had no trouble pursuing just about any potential prey. He's also shown that fully grown adults would have brought up the rear at half the speed, perhaps to deliver a massive killer bite. But his detractors still disagree. In their view, adult Tyrannosaurs were too slow to hunt in a pack.
As they got bigger and they got heavier and more ponderous, there's no pursuit. I think they would have moved more to an ambush style of predation.
For Dr. Currie, this view of a solitary ambushing Tyrannosaur doesn't mesh with the adult skeletons found together in Alberta and in the Gobi Desert. He's still convinced that T-Rex hunted in packs, and he's prepared to test his theory further.
What I need to understand at this stage is what are the other possible explanations I can come up with to explain why we get so many Tyrannosaurs grouped together.
One possibility is to look at another survivor from the prehistoric world. To do that, Dr. Currie must travel to the kingdom of the Komodo dragon, the largest carnivorous lizard on Earth. Will these prehistoric survivors finally unlock the mystery of the Gobi skeletons? Dinosaur expert Dr. Phil Currie believes the Tyrannosaurs hunted in killer packs. His discovery that young Tyrannosaurs were fast runners is solid evidence that supports his theory. But how did the slower adults move with the gang? Dr. Currie's detractors say they didn't. They either ambushed prey or were scavengers. To test this idea, Dr. Currie wants to look at a prehistoric scavenger that has survived millions of years in a remote corner of the world. His quest takes him to Indonesia, a chain of 17,000 islands that crisscrosses the equator.
One of the wonderful things about being a paleontologist is that you're looking at ancient life to try and bring it back to life again. And the only way we can really do that is to look at things that actually represent what dinosaurs were.
On the island of Rinca, in the Komodo National Park, the Komodo dragon is the undisputed apex predator. What might these giant lizards tell Dr. Currie about how tyrannosaurs fed themselves 65 million years ago?
Clearly seeing big animals like Komodo dragons and how they interact is going to teach me a lot. I'll walk away with a much better understanding of the animals that I study, tyrannosaurs.
When Dr. Currie finally comes face to face with the killer lizards, they're moving in on a potential prey. He must tread carefully, as the dragons are quick to attack and highly dangerous. From a safe distance, he can see how much they look like dinosaurs.
When I look at that skull, it just says Tarbosaurus. I mean, we look at the front of the snout, we see it's very broad across the front. It's almost like a Tyrannosaur that way. The teeth you can just make out when he opens his mouth, and all we really see is the tips. Those teeth are recurved, facing back into the throat. They're serrated, just like Tyrannosaur teeth as well.
Komodos have 60 razor-sharp teeth, similar to Tyrannosaurs.
Komodo dragons and dinosaurs had a rather unique way of avoiding the dentist. Basically what they did was every time the tooth got to a certain age, they would drop it from their mouths and replace it with a brand new one. And Komodo dragons replace their teeth at an incredible rate. There's 3 or 4 sets of teeth in every position every year.
This continual replacement guarantees a massive lethal bite every time. The longer teeth are older. The shorter teeth are the new growth.
The claws, wow. You know, with the musculature on those legs, you can see that those claws would do an awful lot of damage, just as much as the Tyrannosaur.
But did tyrannosaurs hunt their food like Komodo dragons? These lethal lizards are carnivores, and though they're mostly scavengers, they will also hunt all kinds of mammals, birds, and reptiles, and even humans. They use a deadly snake-like poison that prevents blood from clotting, causing severe loss in blood pressure, which sends their prey into shock. The dragons then wait for their victim to weaken and die. Then they close in. This tactic allows them to kill large animals without a fight.
People have speculated that maybe that's what Tarbosaurus was doing too. That the serrated teeth, which don't seem to be very good for sawing up flesh anymore, may still be serrated because they're septic. And they'll infect anything they bite into. Basically, all mouths of predators are septic. And the more nasty the food that they eat, the chances are very good there's enough bacteria in its mouth that it's going to give you an infection that could kill you if it's not treated.
Now that I've seen a Komodo dragon in the wild, and I have a better sense of how it's moving and interacting at least with its mates, what I need to see now is how these animals actually feed.
The Komodo dragons are closing in on a water buffalo. They just need to get close enough for one deadly bite. This time, their prey escapes.
They didn't get that close, but they tried. Now, obviously, they can't catch the water buffalo by running. It's much faster than they are, but I think if they got very, very close, then at that point they would have behaved very, very differently and would have been fast and aggressive.
There are dragons all over the island. It only takes one of them to be successful for all the others to eat. Komodo dragons can smell a dying animal up to 6 miles away.
2 days ago, the dragons managed to wound this wild pig. One dead animal brings in the carnivores from many, many miles away.
It's a feeding frenzy.
I don't think this animal's going to last for another 10 minutes, and it's only been 10 minutes so far.
Now, for the first time, Dr. Currie can envisage what a Tyrannosaurus feeding frenzy might have looked like.
I don't think any hadrosaur had a chance with a couple of Tyrannosaurs eating at it.
Komodo dragons can eat up to 80% of their body weight in one sitting.
I think that in all probability, Tyrannosaurs did exactly this thing.
That would mean that a 5-ton Tyrannosaurus would have been able to consume an astonishing 4 tons of meat at one time. The most revealing moment comes as the dragons finish their meal. They've consumed every last bit of the wild pig: hair, skin, hooves, and bones. This could explain the mystery of the missing herbivore fossils in the Gobi Desert.
You know, I've often wondered why we find so many Tarbosaur skeletons in Mongolia. The fact that we don't find duck-billed dinosaur skeletons, and we don't find other small dinosaur skeletons, perhaps the Tarbosaurus just completely dismembered them and ate them 100%.
We have evidence from Tyrannosaur feces that are just entirely made up of crushed bone fragments.
Observing the Komodos, Dr. Currie can see that however similar their eating habits might be to those of a Tyrannosaur, there is one big difference. Komodo dragons are basically scavengers, and when they do hunt, it's definitely not as an organized pack.
Many Komodo dragons will follow the same prey animal around for a long time. They're not hunting cooperatively, they're just going where the meat is.
Dr. Currie is certain Tyrannosaurs hunted very differently.
I think now we've got to take this a little bit further and look at the other possibility that Tyrannosaurs, in fact, did hunt cooperatively.
Dr. Currie can finally see the proof of his Dino Gangs theory coming together. He's shown that Tyrannosaurs did have the build and the speed for pack hunting. But did they also have the highly developed senses and, crucially, the brain to hunt cooperatively? Hoping to find an answer to this question, Dr. Currie now travels to Athens, Ohio, where cutting-edge dinosaur research is taking place. He's come to meet Dr. Larry Whitmer, who he hopes will shed light on how these ancient killers might have behaved.
We never used to think that we could ever come up with something like the behavior of an animal that lived 70 million years ago. We've got new ways of looking at these things now that are opening up new vistas for reconstructing and understanding the behavior of extinct animals.
Using CT scanning, research will allow Dr. Currie to go where he's never gone before. Inside the head of a Tyrannosaurus.
What CT scanning has done, because it uses X-rays, it allows us, without even touching the fossil, to peer inside, to sort of reveal the secrets that time has kept from our eyes by peering through the bone, peering through the rock that still entombs the fossil. And what that allows us to do is to see some things that time has stripped away. The idea with CT scans is it uses X-rays to sort of slice up something like a loaf of bread. The X-rays will, in a sense, millimeter by millimeter, fraction of a millimeter by fraction of a millimeter, slice up that skull.
Now Dr. Currie will get his first ever view of a Tyrannosaur's brain cavity.
It's actually really exciting. It's almost the same kind of excitement that a field paleontologist gets as he sort of carefully brushes the sand and dirt away that have covered the fossil for millions of years. In the same way, we are seeing things that no one has ever seen before.
Will this peek inside a Tyrannosaur's head finally prove that they lived and hunted in deadly organized gangs? At Ohio University, Dr. Phil Currie and Dr. Larry Whitmer are putting the skull of a 70-million-year-old Tyrannosaurus through a CT scan. As the scan probes the skull's nooks and crannies, the long-extinct animal appears to come alive. Now Dr. Currie begins to see the final proof of his pack-hunting theory take shape before his eyes.
Instead of just being sort of isolated skeletal features, all of a sudden soft tissues start, in a sense, dripping off of the skeleton. Blood vessels and nerves start issuing forth from holes in the skull. The sides of the bones become clothed in muscles. We start to see a living, breathing animal emerge before our eyes.
Mapping the inside of the skull, the scan clearly shows the size and shape of the dinosaur's brain.
This space right in the middle here actually houses the brain. So what we can do is use this computer software to build up slice by slice, and we can start to see what the brain itself looks like.
The brain shows large olfactory bulbs. This means that Tyrannosaurus had a very good sense of smell. It also appears to have had large optic nerves, which would mean good vision. Its eye sockets faced forwards, providing excellent binocular vision. In modern animals, binocular vision is found mainly in predators. It allows them to more accurately detect prey and gauge distance and movement while hunting. If tyrannosaurs didn't hunt, they would not have needed the accurate depth perception that binocular vision gave them. The CT scan is also able to determine the length and shape of the inner ear, the spiral canals that affect agility and balance in animals.
These canals of the inner ear right here are very long and delicate, suggesting that this sense of balance and equilibrium was very highly developed in Tyrannosaurs.
But the inner ear has other functions, something that all predators have: stability of gaze.
We can imagine this by focusing your eyes on the tip of your finger. And if you move the tip of your finger, the image blurs. But it turns out that if you actually turn your head around, the image remains sharp. So that as the head turns, the eye muscles are constantly making these adjustments, these compensating movements to keep that image fixed and in focus.
In the back of the head, the cerebellum controls movements and motor coordination.
It winds up that the cerebellum in Tyrannosaurs is a pretty large, complex portion of the brain, suggesting that, in fact, agility and motor coordination were very important. These were probably animals that were fairly jumpy, relatively quick movements. Certainly the very young animals would have been very highly agile, but even the adults would have had relatively quick, sort of snapping movements of the eyes and the head and the neck.
The scan also reveals a large cavity in the back of the head, used by the ear to supercharge the Tyrannosaur's hearing.
Having all of these air sinuses in the back part of the skull has the effect of changing the acoustic properties of the middle ear such that it becomes sensitive to low-frequency sounds.
Low-frequency sounds carry for long distances, even over rough terrain and through vegetation.
Tyrannosaurs probably were using this potentially infrasound, sounds lower than what we can even hear, as part of its predatory prey tracking mechanisms. What it was able to do was to actually track animals without seeing them.
Dr. Widmer's CT scans have revealed that Tyrannosaurs had senses that were highly developed, specifically for hunting.
Tyrannosaurs have these long-distance prey-tracking mechanisms. The sense of smell that allows them to pick up the odors of prey on the winds. The low-frequency hearing that allows them to hear the movements of animals they can't even see. But when they get close, they have the sense of vision that allows them to keep their fleeing prey firmly within their crosshairs as they chase them across the terrain.
This evidence might at last remove any doubt that tyrannosaurs were hunters.
Looking at the CT scans of the brain of a Tyrannosaurus rex or any of the other tyrannosaurs, I think reconfirms in my mind that these things are predatory animals.
Dr. Currie's theory is that not only were they hunters, but that they did so in packs. That implies that they had another crucial skill: teamwork.
Well, pack hunting is a really sophisticated behaviour. It requires intelligence and the ability to interact socially with other animals, and also to some extent planning and division of tasks within a pack.
Did these animals really have the intelligence to work together as a team? Dr. Whitmer's scan reveals another big surprise.
Kind of blows my mind that we can actually do the CT scanning, pull the data into the computer, and see what the brain structure is like. And it's even more amazing that we can actually print it out in 3 dimensions, and that's life size.
This is big.
And yeah, that looks pretty big.
The cast shows that a Tyrannosaurus brain was roughly 6 times bigger than that of other dinosaurs at the time.
By looking at that area, can you actually say something about the social behavior in these animals?
Well, I can tell you, I wish what we could do is actually point to sort of like a cooperative hunting lobe of the brain. Sadly, it doesn't really work that way.
It's the size of the cerebrum, the main part of the brain, that allows Dr. Whitmer to estimate how advanced their behavior might have been.
When we actually see expansion of those higher centers, expansion of the cerebrum, that probably we can be pretty safe to assume that these guys did have some pretty sophisticated behaviors that they were able to engage in.
There's absolutely nothing in the brain to say that it could not have complex social behavior.
No, I think, in fact, they may have actually had the cognitive power to have been communal hunters.
The results of the CT scan appear to give Currie the proof he needs for his theory about tyrannosaurs. Until now, mammals were thought to have been the first organized hunters. It now looks like tyrannosaurs were working together millions of years earlier. They had the highly developed senses of an efficient predator, the brain capacity to be able to hunt as a team.
In their heads, they had all of the tools they needed to be effective predators. Senses of vision and smell and hearing to track prey, to run them down and to capture them. But even more importantly, locked up within their skull was a brain that gave them the capacity to actually hunt, and to hunt successfully and to kill.
Some predatory dinosaurs were actually quite intelligent and sociable. So pack hunting is not out of the picture, but it's certainly controversial.
If young tyrannosaurs were quick and agile, and the adults slower but clever, how did a dino gang work? Dr. Currie has traveled to the Tswalu Game Reserve in South Africa to see how a modern hunter has become the apex predator by working as a team. Millions of years separate today's African plains from the ancient Gobi. The wildlife here is as plentiful and varied as it was back then. And the same rules of nature still apply. There are the hunted and the hunters. Living off these herds of herbivores is one of the fiercest predators alive today. 500 pounds of muscle, sharp claws, and vice-like jaws armed with deadly teeth. Just as Tyrannosaurus ruled the prehistoric plain, here the lion is king.
Yeah. It's a cool day in the Kalahari.
Observing the pride, Dr. Currie understands the lion's secret to successful pack hunting. Start them young. Lionesses care for their cubs for up to 2 years. It's a long learning process that teaches them essential survival skills.
There's no question at all that with social predators, one of the biggest advantages is not just clustering together and being able to protect each other and join together to hunt together. It's the fact that the young learn from the adults. So they have a much better chance of surviving than other species of predators that don't have this kind of social behavior. Looking at them here, they look very peaceful and almost friendly. But I suspect at night it's a different game.
Once the sun goes down, the lions set to work. The adults go off to hunt their prey, while those too young to join in stay behind, honing their hunting skills through play. Dr. Currie doesn't have to wait long before the youngsters meet their first real challenge: a porcupine. Its sharp quills keep the lion at bay, much like an armored dinosaur might have done against a Tyrannosaurus millions of years ago. The young lion needs help. Teamwork soon solves the prickly problem. It's precisely this close cooperation between mammals that some scientists don't believe would have been possible between tyrannosaurs.
You would think it would be better if a tyrannosaur could cooperate to eat something spiky, but I doubt the idea would even cross their tiny reptile brains.
Now the older lions swing into action. This is what Dr. Currie has come to see: the transformation from a family group into a tight hunting pack.
What I'm really keen to see here is how these animals actually interact when they hunt. And that's a clue to trying to understand what was going on back in the Cretaceous.
The scent of prey is in the air. The hunt is on.
They go into a stalking mode. Each member of the pride seems to know exactly what it has to do.
They communicate silently. Their victims are unaware that they're being surrounded.
The younger animals are the ones that are doing most of the hunting because they're the ones that are the fastest and most capable of doing it. It's the adults that have the experience and also have the power. So the combination of the two is pretty deadly to potential prey animals.
Gang members spread out left and right, frightening the herd, sending them straight into the jaws of the more experienced adults who lie in wait. It's all so fast, so efficient, that it only takes a couple of minutes before dinner is served. Hunting is hard work, so the lions sleep most of the day to conserve energy for the next hunt.
Gang hunting has a lot of advantages. It's actually hard to believe that communal hunting wouldn't have evolved 70 million years ago, potentially in tyrannosaurs.
They were actually quite sophisticated animals who could understand their environment and interact with each other in complex ways.
Tyrannosaurs were incredibly successful animals for most of the late Cretaceous, and there's no question at all that what they were doing worked. Over that period of time, they unquestionably had lots of time to develop their instincts for cooperative hunting at some level.
Dr. Currie's quest has shown that the behavior of today's predators probably evolved many millions of years earlier than we thought. If that's the case, how does that affect our ideas about our own evolution? Dinosaur expert Dr. Phil Currie has been on a quest to find evidence for his theory that tyrannosaurs were far more intelligent and dangerous than we thought. They hunted in bloodthirsty packs millions of years before mammals did. In Alberta, Canada, he unearths more than 20 tyrannosaur skeletons lying near to each other. Proof, perhaps, that they might have lived in a group. But one bone bed isn't sufficient evidence. In Mongolia's Gobi Desert, there are at least 11 tyrannosaur fossils lying close to each other. Comparing the leg bones of a young tyrannosaur to that of an adult, Dr. Currie discovers that the juveniles were built to be much lighter and, therefore, faster. He notices that the leg bones of a young tyrannosaur are very similar to those of an ostrich, the fastest two-legged creature on Earth. Juvenile tyrannosaurs must therefore have run at similar speeds, close to 45 miles per hour. But the adults were still too heavy to be fast and agile hunters. Were they forced to become scavengers? Observing the behavior of the ancient Komodo dragons, Currie realizes that tyrannosaurs probably behaved in a similar way. Like all predators, they most likely hunted and scavenged when the opportunity arose. As the Komodos finished feeding, Currie understands why there are so few skeletons of prey dinosaurs among the tyrannosaur fossils in Alberta and the Gobi. It's because, like the Komodos, tyrannosaurs ate everything, including the bones. A CT scan of a tyrannosaur's skull shows that they had the brain size and sensory capabilities to make them exceptional pack hunters.
What we can see now is that T-Rex wasn't that old sort of slow-moving, dull-witted predator of the past. Our new studies are showing that tyrannosaurs were fast, agile animals that could move potentially even together in communal packs.
Dr. Currie believes that the combination of fast youngsters and slower adults in a hunting pack is very similar to the strategy employed by lions. But pack hunting implies an awareness of self and understanding the intentions of the others around you. It implies planning, strategy, and thought of potential outcome. It means understanding that you may not make the kill, but you will get to eat it. If tyrannosaurs had these skills, it would mean that its social intelligence existed millions of years before previously thought.
The evidence right now is strongly suggesting that dinosaurs in their peak were highly adapted animals. They were warm-blooded, very successful, and very diverse. They should have survived.
The extinction of practically all dinosaurs is mostly blamed on one cataclysmic event: an asteroid that crashed into the Earth and dramatically changed our world's climate. But scientists now wonder if this alone could have been responsible for ending such a successful diversity of life. Dinosaurs had, by then, been around for 150 million years. Some scientists believe that they were already dying out by the time the asteroid struck.
About 7 million years before we get to the end of the Cretaceous period, until the time when dinosaurs actually finally become extinct, we see a decline in the numbers. There are fewer types of dinosaur around in the world, and it seems that something is already starting to affect their diversity and actually to hit them just before the extinction hits.
Probably because of local climatic changes and shifts in some of the ecosystems And these are the same kind of things that we're seeing today.
This is the crux of Dr. Currie's quest. Re-evaluating how tyrannosaurs behaved could give us indications about our own behavior and what we're doing to the world today.
I really believe that history does repeat itself over and over again, obviously, whether you're talking about natural history or human history. We have to learn lessons from dinosaurs because really those animals were doing as well as modern mammals are doing.
What if Tyrannosaur gangs had continued to rule the world? Mankind have evolved at all?
Dinosaurs do everything in their history that the terrestrial mammals do today. The history of life is characterized by different kinds of animals rising to prominence, but then suddenly and catastrophically perhaps they disappear, and it's completely different animals that take over. Maybe what we can learn from the extinction of the dinosaurs is that nothing can be successful forever.
Sometimes we think that the ancient world is very different than today, and yet in many ways the play has always been the same, and what we're changing is the actors over time. I don't think dinosaurs did anything unique. They did it very well at that time. The same process is going on, the same play is still being enacted today.
The skills that were developed millions of years ago by creatures like Tyrannosaurus are the same skills that eventually made us the apex predators of the world today.